More talks planned for Thursday between Iran and the US, which is mobilising its largest military force since the invasion of Iraq more than 2 decades ago. Mixed messages from US President Donald Trump, while Tehran says it wants talks but is ready for war too. So where do both sides stand? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. The US and Iran gear up for more talks on Thursday, with mixed messages from both sides as the world anxiously wonders what's next. Iran says it wants talks, but is ready for war if they fail. US President Donald Trump is apparently surprised Iran hasn't capitulated. He's deployed the biggest military force the US has assembled in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. At the centre of the build-up is the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, with fighter jets including F-18s and F-35s, as well as electronic warfare aircraft. It's supported by several guided missile destroyers operating in the Gulf of Oman and nearby waters. A second strike group is on its way. The USS Gerald R. Ford is currently crossing the Mediterranean, flanked by 3 destroyers. Flight tracking data also shows a surge in activity with multiple squadrons of attack aircraft, refueling tankers, cargo and surveillance planes moving between the US, Europe and the Middle East. All of this is well within range of Iran's extensive arsenal of weaponry. Its medium-range ballistic missiles can travel around 2,000 kilometers, capable of reaching targets in Israel as well as American bases in Turkey and across the Gulf. So what does this military and diplomatic choreography signal? Are the talks meaningful negotiations or just a sideshow? Why would the US assemble such firepower if it doesn't intend to use it? And how might Iran respond? We'll talk to our panel of guests in just a few moments. But first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
The American war machine is assembling in the Middle East, while Iranian forces are testing air defense missiles and holding naval drills with Russia, all ahead of another round of indirect talks about Iran's nuclear program, set to be held in Geneva on Thursday. Tehran insists a diplomatic solution is possible, and the president is framing the negotiations so far as encouraging. Posting on social media, Iran is committed to peace and stability in the region. He noted the latest discussions included the exchange of practical proposals and yielded encouraging signals. He went on to say Tehran continues to monitor U.S. actions closely and has made all necessary preparations for any potential scenario. The U.S. president has repeatedly threatened escalation to force a deal. Iran's nuclear program has long been the core issue for Washington and the West. But added to that now is its crackdown on anti-government protesters last month, which led to more sanctions.
For 47 years, they've been talking and talking and talking. In the meantime, we've lost a lot of lives while they talk, and legs blown off, arms blown off, faces blown off. It's been going on for a long time, so let's see what happens. In the meantime, we have tremendous power has arrived, and additional power, as you know, another carrier is going out shortly. So we'll see it how. If we could get it settled for once and for all, that would be good.
But Tehran has made it clear it will not give in to pressure and will defend itself.
I think there is no limited strikes. An act of aggression would be regarded as an act of aggression, period. And any state would react to an act of aggression as part of its inherent right of self-defense ferociously. So that's what we would do.
The U.S. special envoy involved in the negotiations admitted President Trump thought the military buildup would have pushed Iran to concede by now.
He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure, with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
At the heart of the talks is enriched uranium. Iran wants enough for civilian, not military purposes. The US and Israel want zero enrichment. Both sides believe they hold leverage, but the stakes are incredibly high. Even limited strikes could engulf the region, with energy supply routes and global markets hanging in the balance. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this with our panel of guests joining us on today's Inside Story. We have Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council. He joins us from Washington, D.C. In Tehran, Hassan Ahmadian is assistant professor at the University of Tehran. And also in Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz is senior fellow at the NATO Defence College. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Well, as you heard there, Richard, in our intro, two simultaneous things are going on. A great big military build-up, absolutely vast. In fact, we talk about an armada, but there are two aircraft carriers, each surrounded by lots of ships. You could, in fact, say it's a double armada that the US is gathering there. At the same time, there is diplomacy ongoing, more talks taking place on Thursday. Which of those two tracks, the military or the diplomatic, in your view, Richard, has the upper hand right now?
Right. I don't see them necessarily as conflictual in the sense that in President Trump's view, having the military deployments could actually facilitate the diplomatic track. I think, President Trump would prefer a negotiated settlement, and he certainly engaged in a variety of contacts, primarily through the direct talks, but also indirectly through various intermediaries. And then the military forces give him a bunch of options if he wants to employ them. But I still think the focus for now is on the diplomatic track with the military forces in the background.
Hassan, when we do this game of working out what's going to happen, it's a mug's game, really, in the Middle East, because it's such a combustible region with so many moving parts. Let me ask you the question a different way. How worried are people in Tehran right now about what might happen?
Well, people are concerned with all the deployments into the region. The Iranians see what is going on rather differently from what was just described. The Armada, as they call it, is part of a capitulation effort that was talked about by Steve Witkoff just yesterday. They want to force Iran to capitulation. That's how the Iranians understood it. And obviously what the envoy said reinforces that message. And that's why the Iranian view and posture is mirroring that of the United States, in that Iranians are talking diplomacy and preferring diplomacy, but at the same time are showing their strength, projecting power, trying to keep the U.S. forces at bay in talks. So they're also backing their diplomatic effort with what they have as military equipments and military might.
Jamal, of course, in some ways, you could argue we've seen some of this before, because there were negotiations taking place last year between the US and Iran. And then, of course, while those negotiations were taking place, with more talks planned, in fact, on the 15th of June, there were supposed to be talks in Muscat, the capital of Oman. 2 days before that, Israel attacked. And the US clearly knew about that. Do you think this time the US is negotiating in good faith?
That's a really good question. I think that this time it's more clear and transparent what Donald Trump's view of negotiations truly is. And it's one that focuses pretty intensely on the coercive element of it. I do think, though, that I think Donald Trump is sort of a gambler here who has doubled and tripled down on what really was a bluff and was not intended to be something that committed the United States to a open-ended war with Iran. I think that Trump must be concerned that there is really no sort of low-risk, cheap option here to strike Iran and then quickly get out and not be committed to some long-term, potentially long-term military exchange. And so I think that Trump and the Trump administration, just as the Iranians, have a lot of interest here in finding some way to get to a deal, because the military alternative, I don't think, has been very well thought out. And I think if they have to go in that direction, it's going to be a major investment of time, resources, human capital, not to mention political capital for the administration.
Richard, are we even seeing the language of diplomacy? Hassan was referring a moment ago to recent comments in an interview by Steve Witkoff, one of Trump's lead negotiators in this, saying Trump is curious that the Iranians have not yet capitulated. But shouldn't they be negotiating, not talking about surrender?
I think in practice they are negotiating. According to the various media sources, there are a variety of proposals under discussion. I think we understand the issues in contention. They're primarily related to Iran's nuclear program, and there are three core issues here. It's how much enrichment should take place in Iran itself, what to do with the uranium that Iran has already enriched, and what kind of transparency measures should be enforced to monitor any sensitive Iranian nuclear activities going forward. And so those three issues, you can think of a variety of trade-offs. Some can be addressed immediately, some earlier. There are other issues that have been raised: Iran's missile program, ties with proxies, treatment of protesters, and so on. But I think the core is going, at least in the near term, will be the nuclear issues. And I think there's still discussions about various options.
Jamal, is it that clear cut? Because, I've been trying to read what the US position is, what the US desired outcome is, and different people in the administration seem to, as they did last year, say different things. Is it, Trump has said repeatedly, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and Iran says it doesn't want a nuclear weapon. But is their position clearly no enrichment?
No, and that's really a big problem with the president's diplomatic efforts in his second term. I don't think that the last round of negotiations that preceded the June strikes were ones in which the United States had a clear position until near the end of those talks, when the military adventure broke out. And as you note, Donald Trump has always said no nuclear weapons. That's sort of ambiguous, but I think people who are trying to look at things glass half full, people who hope for a deal, thought that that was sort of ambiguous enough that it left room for a creative solution that maybe did not cross the Iranian red line of zero enrichment, but satisfied some of the skeptics of the JCPOA that Iran wouldn't be able to break out. Since then, this zero enrichment position has somewhat hardened politically in the United States. That came as Republicans in Congress sent multiple letters sort of demanding the administration maintain this position. And so I still think it's in flux, but there's sort of two parallel processes happening. There's sort of the process that is being run by bureaucrats and technocrats and sort of the political machinations of Washington around what diplomacy needs to look like from a Republican president. And then there's the Trump process, which is a little bit more make it up as you go along and spitball. And so perhaps somewhere between those two processes, there is actually a solution here. But when you are hearing on one hand about sort of ambiguous, but ambiguous goals about bottom lines like the nuclear program, on the other hand, you hear people talking about the need for Iran not just to prove that its nuclear program is not for military purposes, but potentially has to limit its ballistic missile distance, potentially has to eliminate support for proxies in the region. Then you get into this territory where I think it's very hard to imagine that the United States is negotiating from a position of good faith, because those are big, unwieldy challenges that need serious negotiations to ever potentially unpack. And what we have here is sort of this gunboat, we want a fast answer negotiation. And so I think that is a much more favorable scenario for a simple solution that is more of a compromise and is only focused on the nuclear issue versus this broad, comprehensive deal that I think people who don't actually want a deal are saying must be what is on the table.
Hassan, perhaps you could give us clearly what the Iranian position is on enrichment. I think I'm right in saying Iran says that under the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, that every country has a right to enrich. And I also think Iran is worried about the Libya model, what happened in 2003 when the Libyan leader Gaddafi gave up all his nuclear program, and of course only a few years later was attacked by NATO and found himself deposed and killed soon after.
Incremental escalation against its foe has been one U.S. policy for decades now. And of course, that's in the back of the heads of many Iranian strategists here. But at this point, as Jamal, I think, explained quite well, the Iranian view is that we don't have a clear position on the part of the United States. We articulated a position that is focused on the nuclear and brought it to the table, as the Iranian diplomats are saying. But at the same time, we hear different voices from the U.S. team. One time it's no bomb policy, another it's no enrichment, and voices about Iran's ballistic missiles program, its regional policy, its foreign policy, etc. So the fluctuation there is really frustrating. You don't have a clear position on the other side. But when it comes to Iran, it's clear we will trade transparency and limits, as it is said by many Iranian officials, for sanctions relief. And that was done back in 2015. Iran has shown that it's not willing to go for weaponization, and it expects for return sanctions relief. That's the entirety of the Iranian position. The mismatch with the American position, which fluctuates, is really something that troubled the previous discussions, the 5 rounds that preceded the war, and now it's troubling it again, because every time, as we hear from diplomats here, every time the U.S. team comes to the room, they're as if we didn't have discussions before. It's reset, and that's frustrating, and it's really impeding progress.
Richard, you've watched lots and lots of diplomatic processes over the years. What do you think about the way this is being carried out? Because there have only been in this round 2 pretty short meetings, and these are very, very complex subjects, particularly if you want to look beyond just the nuclear program. And even the nuclear program is terribly technical. And yet these are short meetings, the latest one only about 3 hours. And the US team, Mr. Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, managed to do this in Geneva, slotting it in on the same day as talks regarding Ukraine and Russia.
Yes, this is, I think this is a feature of the Trump's administration foreign policy, relying on a few key envoys and empowering them. It's been done sometimes in the past. Henry Kissinger had a lot of authority to negotiate deals, and that sometimes worked well. There's of course problems on the Iranian side as well, in that for a long time the Iranians refused to deal directly with the U.S. They had to go through intermediaries, and so that delayed things. I think, given the importance of the issue and the fact that the advisors to the president are giving diverse views, which we discussed, I think it's really going to take a decision by President Trump on what he wants, and that to be will reflect what's given to him by his advisors, what we get from the Iranians in the next few days. And I think then once he reaches a decision, it'll be focusing on implementation. And that may be easier. We've been discussing this problem for 20 years, or a lot of creative solutions about multilateral enrichment, multilateral discussions to deal with some of the missile and proxy issues, bring in the GCC states, so on. So there's a lot of material out there that we can draw on. There just needs to be a decision about what is going to be the joint goal the two sides want. And then the execution should be not as difficult as perhaps previous rounds.
Jamal, as Richard says, all sorts of ideas have been floating around. Enrichment outside the country, some sort of consortium of regional countries doing the enrichment. Those don't seem to be acceptable to Iran. Iran's coming up with its own plan. The senior security official, Ali Larijani, is presenting something we understand very, very soon. But my question is, what do you think President Trump will accept? And it's got to be something that looks very different from the 2015 deal, which he said was an awful deal.
Yeah, of all the unpredictable characters and issues, it's Donald Trump and the Iran nuclear issue. So predicting what he will accept is probably pretty difficult. I know that, what the discussions are, at least publicly, is that there is a proposal for Iran to have a token level of enrichment. So under the JCPOA, Iran was allowed to enrich up to 3% and eventually increase its enrichment levels. What's being talked about is something like 1.5%, which would satisfy the Iranian concern about maintaining this fundamental right to enrichment. But whether that actually addresses the concerns of the United States and Israel about just Iran having a capability to enrich is really pretty uncertain. And I think that one of the features of these talks that maybe actually is an asset to getting a deal is the fact that Iran is not currently, as far as we know, currently enriching uranium. Because of the June war, Iran's stockpile is likely buried under a mountain of rubble. This, for the parties at the table, could be useful to be able to say, okay, we're going to continue to not enrich for some time period and then have a token level of enrichment so that Iran has that right. But then for Trump, you have something that Obama did not obtain through his talks, which is some sort of suspension of enrichment. I don't know if that's on the table or if it's even possible, but there are new dynamics here that I think allow the parties to find ways to potentially satisfy their bottom lines. And it is really a question for Trump. Is no enrichment his bottom line? Because if it is, this has been a position that has prevented the United States from resolving this issue for many years. And it wasn't until Obama came in and said, we're actually going to compromise on that one issue. That is what unlocked the JCPOA and unlocked the ability for the parties to reach a deal. So if Trump is able to do that, I think that there are kind of a multitude of ways to sort of satisfy the Iranian bottom line, but also satisfy American concerns about weaponization and ensuring that Iran does not have a path to weaponization.
Hassan, you'll be aware that President Trump came into office with a campaign saying he didn't want to fight any more foreign wars, and yet you've got this massive build-up of military air power and naval power just off the coast of Iran. Perhaps Trump emboldened by what happened last year, but also Venezuela. I mean, let me ask you this question. Is there a Venezuela model in this that Trump might try to remove the Ayatollah and keep the government in Tehran, and would that ever work?
Well, I think they've tried it already many times in the past few decades. I don't think that would work because Iran's military and security apparatuses have been acting independently for 5 decades. We don't have American boots on or presence in the country, and we don't have Israeli presence. I mean, of course, spies might be, but presence in the sense of the official presence, as the companies were in Venezuela, for instance, they weren't here. I don't think the Iranian political system is that weak for that model to work. I can give you many reasons why I think so, but I mean, it's basically not really comparable in my mind. But generally, what concerns the Iranians is not that model. It concerns them that this basically standoff can escalate into a conflict. They prefer diplomacy, but they are not willing to give everything for that sake. They want diplomacy to work in a give and take way, not in a capitulation way. And it boils down really to whether the United States wants a no-bomb policy vis-a-vis Iran, or it wants all Israeli priorities in Iran. If the latter is the case, I'm afraid there won't be a deal, and we are up for a confrontation. And that's the most concerning thing, not really the Venezuela model or any other model in Iran.
Richard, by some estimates, 40 to 50% of deployable US air power is now directed towards Iran. Does that tell you anything about the timeline for this? Because one assumes you can't just keep all those forces there indefinitely.
Well, there isn't an urgent imperative in the military sense. I would disagree with you there because as discussed, Iran is not going to get a nuclear weapon soon. Its missile and other forces have been weakened by the June war and will not soon be rebuilt. And there's not another security crisis. So if there would look like China was going to invade Taiwan or something else, which would force a timeline, need to reposition the U.S. forces at some point, that might drive it. But President Trump showed a lot of patience in Venezuela, keeping large numbers of forces there for months. I think that he can take time to see the negotiation process go further, and he doesn't need to execute an urgent military operation. That said, there are a number of forces there. He has a lot of military options, and he can implement them fairly quickly if he decides it's necessary. But I don't think he's made that decision yet.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you to our guests today, Richard Weitz, Hassan, Ahmadian, and Jamal, Abdi. For more background context and analysis on this story, check out our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like to know what you think too. Post your comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can find us on X. Just look for @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, James Bays, from the team here in Doha. Stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.